Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Are you allowed to go to school like that? Okay. Oh, send me pictures. Okay. I need to go, but I'll speak to you tomorrow. I love you. Okay. Bye. Hi guys. Sorry. I have children, and they're calling me at 9 p.m. They're supposed to be in bed, but life happens. How are you? We're not in East London anymore. We won't be going back to East London because wow, guys, I have seen a lot this weekend that has convinced me for the third time why I am so disappointed in how beautiful that place is and how neglected it has been. But that's a story for a different day. So I hope you guys have had a good weekend. It is Monday tomorrow. I hope you're prepared for what's going to happen in the next week if you're ready for February, because apparently January has been 6 months. We have a guest here tonight. Claudia's back in the room. She's just standing behind the camera. She's pulling her face because she didn't think I'd bring her up. But I'm gonna get right into the topic, and I'm gonna keep this as short as possible because I know everyone has to go to work tomorrow. I do understand that on Instagram these stories are very difficult, these lives are very difficult to share. If you can find them on Facebook, please share them with people you think will benefit from them. I am going to talk about the medical neglect of narcissists tonight, and specifically because I know too many people who don't even know that this is happening to them, and in South Africa this is not spoken about almost at all. So like I talk about most of my topics about narcissism, which is people who have abusive traits because they have had serious childhood trauma that have turned them essentially into self-protectors, and they don't trust a single soul regardless of whether they're related to them or not. They really do not change, and the older they get worse because they are so insecure about themselves. They need to make sure that they are setting up all sorts of protocols to make sure that they're protected, even with the people that they say they love, right? One of the biggest things that they use that you can recognize, so if you don't know someone is a narcissist, one of the biggest times you're going to see it is when someone is sick, right? So imagine you were in a relationship with someone and you got ill or ended up in hospital, and then all of a sudden this person is barely showing up, they're barely contacting you, they don't want to hear about your complaints, they don't want to sort of be around when you're ill, because it requires too much attention and requires empathy, something that narcissists do not have in their arsenal. They don't know how to be empathetic to other people. So when people need them emotionally, they essentially emotionally and physically ghost for most of it. But this is very dangerous, especially when children are involved. So because narcissists either see children as an extension of themselves, or they try to turn the children into a version of them that they want the kids to be. When a child is sick, it feels like it's a reflection on them. Either that they are a bad person, they're a bad parent, and it makes them look bad. So they completely ignore that the child even has a disease. They do this with their partners as well. They make sure that they're not around. Partners can actually be extremely ill, and they'll completely neglect that the partner needs their assistance. This is dangerous because you could be on your deathbed and your partner is completely unavailable. I've had experiences where I've seen people die, and because narcissists have no empathy, they have no way of actually physically being supportive and also sympathizing and empathizing with the family members of someone who died, even in their own family systems. Now, the reason why this is very dangerous in a medical situation is because children don't have the ability to get medical assistance on their own, right? And if their medical needs are neglected, they will and can get worse, right? So for the most part, when you're addressing medical needs with narcissists, they will either completely deny that those needs even exist, right? Even if there's been a diagnosis, even if there's proof, and even if there has been treatment protocols given to the child, narcissists will completely deny a child's health problems, or they will just completely neglect them as though they don't exist. So time and time again, if you watch stories about like even movies where they have abusive partners, generally when someone needs some medical care, that person is nowhere to be seen. They don't have the ability to actually do what it takes to assist that person. And children suffer the most. Children who come out of narcissistic households are extremely traumatized because not only are they emotionally neglected, in some cases physically abused, witness either physical or emotional abuse, suffer financial abuse due to the narcissistic parent controlling the environment. They are always also, they treated like drones. So they are expected to perform certain tasks at the narcissist's whim, but then also they are medically neglected. All of those things really, really damage some children. And when they get into their adulthood, they don't understand why they have so much trauma, because they've normalized the abuse so much that to them it seems like this is just how life is. But medical neglect is dangerous because a child can die. I actually read a story, I think it was last week, where there was a parent whose child was sick, and because the child's sickness was frustrating them, they locked the child away so that they didn't have to see the child and essentially didn't have to deal with the illness. I think the parent was eventually caught, but the child was emaciated by the time the child was found. We need to notice things like that, because when a parent is neglecting a child in any way, the systems that we have in place, I'm sorry, someone's car is really loud. The systems that we have in place, social services, police services, medical services, are not well enough trained to notice these things, right? Even physical abuse of children is not addressed the way that it should be unless someone more senior steps into the situation. And there's many reasons for this. We like to blame social services and the police and the hospitals for not doing their job, but our public systems are extremely overwhelmed. So it's very difficult to pay attention to every single patient who comes in there who has a medical neglect need. You will see a child who's been sick for a year and won't know the child has been sick for a year, because number one, the narcissistic parent is not going to admit it. And this child is so sick at this point, someone else has had to step in to actually bring the child into hospital. But no one has actually paid enough attention to the child's history to recognize that something serious is going on. Medical neglect is almost, if not as bad as physical abuse on children that is left unattended. This is why we're constantly hearing stories of children over and over and over dying in their own households, or disappearing at the family member's hand, because they have been extremely neglected and their needs are being neglected. The one thing we must never miss is if a child is being medically neglected, there is no doubt that they are being emotionally neglected. We might think that ignoring a child's emotions like we were raised in our generation is a good thing, but it isn't. It has far exceeding negative effects on the child's upbringing and the way they grow up and the way that they live and the way that they form relationships with other people. It actually, if they have anxious attachment style or avoidant attachment style, it actually aggravates the situation. So they tend to attract the same people to them, whether they are friends, partners, all of that kind of thing. Medical neglect usually is only noticed when something serious is going on. So either police person has had to get involved, a neighbor has seen something is wrong, or a family member has had to call the police or something for them to intervene. For the most part, it happens so quietly that you don't even know that this child is being neglected, and the child doesn't have the words or the verbiage to explain it to you, firstly, and secondly, because this is normalizing their environment, they think it's normal. They think it's okay to be sick for months and months on end and none of their medical needs being addressed. A more recent situation with a child who's been sick for over a year is now being threatened with hearing loss, and other serious medical issues. Take note that if you pick up that someone has narcissistic traits and they have children, do yourself a favor and do that child a favor. Pay closer attention to how that child is being groomed, because most of the time those children are being so ignored, their needs are being so ignored, that it's going to impact the entire family system coming off of that. I feel like we talk so much about narcissism, we talk so much about abuse. In South Africa, like I said the other day, we want to wait for physical signs of abuse before we actually do something. When a child is being neglected from a very young age, and you must remember, medical neglect is what's included with that is nutritional needs are not being met. They're almost never being met if a child is being medically neglected, because the parent can't care for the child's well-being. The child just needs to behave the way the parent expects, right? But this has an impact on this child when they grow up, because now all of their physical and nutritional needs are not being met, which is going to cause disease down the line, right? One of the other dangerous parts about this is, if a child is neglected long enough and it finally comes, or someone eventually pressurizes the parent to get them some medical treatment, the parent will omit very important parts of this child's illness. They will do it because the less that they divulge, the better it makes them look. They can't tell a doctor how bad the child actually is, or how bad, even in a relationship, they can't tell the doctor how ill the person actually is, because it makes them look bad. For them, it's a reflection on them, which isn't in reality even true. But because the insecurities are so high, anything that makes them, they feel like they're going to look like they're the negative one in this situation, they will avoid and omit all of that information. If you end up in a situation where you recognize that there are these kind of red flags, you need to ask more questions, because the chances are very high that that omittance could allow that child to be treated for things that aren't actually what's wrong with them, and aggravate the illnesses and the diseases they already have, right? I wish and I hope that we can really sit down and understand that this idea of narcissism isn't just something that goes over our head. It has real serious consequences for partners and family members and children alike. It has long-sitting issues. I'm going to tell you a story that I have had. I knocked my head when I was 5 years old. I have a scar on the back of my head. My head was bleeding like I was dying. And my narcissistic parent didn't even enter the room. Didn't come and check. We ended up walking with that bleeding head to the doctor. Now I understand that because they're not empathetic, they have no way of responding to this. But it can leave someone dead. When we see these children dying from the hands of their families, we really need to ask ourselves, how many times did we miss medical neglect that should have been addressed? When a child was coughing a little bit too long, when a child had a runny nose for 6 months to a year, when you could see that they looked like they were malnutrition for a long period of time. Those are questions that we need to actually be asking. And we live in a society now where people feel like we shouldn't be involved in other people's business. But when there are children involved, you have to get involved in that business. Because the minute a child looks like they're suffering, they don't have the language to tell you what's going on. And they're probably being shamed for even talking outside of their home about what has happened to them. Right? They normalize it. They don't think that anything is wrong, because these are the only parents they have. And they love their parents. So it's very difficult for them to separate between the fact that they are actually being medically abused and loving them. Children cannot separate the two. As adults and people who have this kind of information, it is our responsibility to address it when we see that these issues have come up. When we see that the child has stunted growth or has been sick a little bit long, to ask those questions. And I don't mean come across in aggressive nature or forward like you need to know things. But if we're not protecting our children and everybody's children as a whole, we're just allowing these perpetrators to continue harming, having more babies, and then completely neglecting them. Narcissistic mothers get frustrated with their babies, so they have a tendency to emotionally and physically neglect their children from a very young age. And children who are neglected between, I think it's 0 and 6, really struggle with attachment for their entire lives. So this is a very important topic. I say to you all every time I'm on this live, I can only give you so much information on these lives, and I did say that I'm working on something a little bigger so that we can go more in depth in this. But psychology is not updated enough for us to even really be talking about this the way that we should. But and I know that we're gonna live with narcissists. They're always going to be in our environment. Abusers are always going to be around us. But medical neglect is a very serious thing. I'm talking a life and death here. We're not talking about, oh, they were emotionally and physically abusive or financially abusive and then I left or whatever. That's big, and it can be, it's huge. But when someone dies, that's a completely different story. Now we're talking about death at the hands of someone who just didn't care that someone was ill. So I hope that gives you some context to what medical neglect. You just, I think, pay attention to the people in those people's circles and figure out how much they are actually around and involved when someone is ill, and if they even pay any attention to it, or if they're living completely different lives when the people in their lives need them the most. That's got to be a very, very big red flag. So happy Sunday. It's gonna be a good week for everyone. I'm tired. I hope you get some rest. And I love you guys very much.